In the far future, when the stars had become roads, and the silence of space had been broken by the voice of human ships, moving through the dark nothingness, Earth was no longer just a blue planet among billions, but had become the birthplace of something far more dangerous than anyone in the galaxy had expected. Humanity had grown quickly, not in size, but in mind. They had not spread across galaxies like the ancient species of the Union, but what they had built was strong, fast, and clever. They were not the oldest nor the most advanced, but they were persistent and bold, and that made them different. For centuries, the Galactic Union had ruled most of the known systems, a vast order of ancient alien civilizations who had agreed long ago to divide the stars among themselves. Each species had its place, each world its purpose, and nothing new was allowed to disturb that balance. But then came Earth, then came humans with their strange nature, their endless curiosity, their unmatched will to push forward even when everything told them to stop. The Union watched for a long time, and in the beginning, they simply ignored Earth, thinking it was just another world filled with temporary noise and light. But as years passed, they saw human ships moving faster, stronger, smarter. They saw humans solve problems that had taken other species centuries to solve. And they saw something else too, something the Union had not expected to see again in the galaxy. They saw a fire. It began with whispers in Union chambers, secret meetings behind closed doors. The word human started appearing more and more in political reports and military briefings. Scientists across the stars sent quiet warnings. They are growing too fast. They are unbalanced. They are dangerous. But it was the Vorlax who finally said what others feared to admit. If we do not act now, we may never be able to act again. The Vorlax were not the largest species, nor the most intelligent, but they had power there. War fleets were unmatched in strength and precision. They had crushed rebellions and silenced uprisings in systems humans had never even heard of. And so when the Vorlax spoke of war, the Union listened. A final message was sent to Earth. It was cold. And official Earth was ordered to surrender to Union control, to stop expansion, to hand over all space travel rights, and submit to re-education programs. The humans were told to give up or face total destruction. There was no room for negotiation. There was no offer of peace. Earth's answer came in less than 2 hours. It was not long. It was not polite. It simply said, "We do not kneeland." So the war began. The first attack came quickly. A Vorlax fleet moved into the outer human colonies without warning. They descended on Eos Station, a small but important outpost near the edge of the solar frontier. The humans there fought back with everything they had, but they were not prepared for the scale of the assault. The Vorlax forces moved like shadows through space. Their weapons tore through metal and flesh. Alike, the battle lasted only 40 minutes. When it was over, nothing remained but frozen debris and silence. But the Vorlax had made one mistake. They broadcasted the destruction across the stars as a message of fear, to break human spirit, to warn other systems not to support Earth. Instead, it had the opposite effect across Earth and every human world. People stopped. They watched the fire, the destruction, the silence, and they remembered every moment in history when they had stood on the edge and refused to fall. They remembered the cities burned, the famine survived. The wars fought not just for land or power, but for pride and for existence. They remembered being underestimated, being called weak, being pushed again and again and again, until one day they pushed back. The death of Eos did not break humanity. It united them in a way that nothing else ever could. Governments who had once been rivals formed a single council. Scientists opened vaults that had been sealed for decades. Engineers began working without sleep. Factories roared to life in the orbit of Mars and Mercury. AI commanders were activated. Old space stations were repurposed as war platforms. Military training became mandatory on every world, every colony, every ship. Even children were taught how to respond in case of invasion. Humanity did not have more ships than the Union. They did not have better weapons or bigger fleets. But they had something else. They had desperation and belief and rage, and they had no intention of dying quietly within. 2 weeks the human fleet was ready to face the enemy above the moons of Saturn. The first counterattack took place. A group of destroyers moved in silence, hidden by the shadows of the rings, and launched a full assault on a Varnock supply convoy. The alien ships responded quickly, but they were not prepared for the human tactics. The human ships did not fight in lines or formations. They came from all directions, using asteroids as cover, and even ramming enemy ships when needed. The battle was messy, chaotic, brutal, and the Varnock were forced to retreat. For the first time in their history, humanity captured one of the enemy ships, and with it one of the commanders. His name was not known, his language strange, but the AI systems broke his speech down word by word until his meaning was clear. He said the Union feared humanity, not because of what they were now, but because of what they could become, because they had no limit, no balance, no chain to hold them back, and that made them dangerous. The message spread across human channels and gave them even more reason to fight. They were not just defending their homes now, they were fighting against a future where their species would be controlled, erased, turned into another page in someone else's history. War had only just begun, but already the stars had changed. The stars above were no longer silent, they echoed with signals, cries, commands, and warnings. Space had become a battlefield where every corner could hide death, and every signal could be a trap. The alien coalition believed the humans would break after the first strike. They thought fear would spread through the human colonies like fire, turning courage into panic. But instead what spread was something far more dangerous. It was unity. It was fury, and it was the knowledge that they had nothing left to lose, but everything to protect. On Earth, factories ran without stopping. Fuel burned day and night as engineers built ships that had never been tested. Weapons that had only existed in theory were now deployed into orbit, and soldiers trained harder than ever before. Even the old ones who had long given up the idea of fighting stood up again, because the war was not just for soldiers, it was for everyone. Leaders of Earth did not argue anymore, their differences buried beneath a common purpose. A single command council was formed, orbiting above Earth inside a command station built in less than 30 days by machines and human hands working together. The council did not waste time. They sent fleets to every colony and reconnected with far-off stations, using deep wave signals thought lost decades ago. They called every asset, every pilot, every drone, every satellite. Nothing was too old or too broken to be fixed and returned to service. The alien coalition expected a slow human response. They had not prepared for the sudden speed of human production or the madness of human tactics. When the second wave of Varnock ships approached Mars, they found no frightened civilians waiting to surrender. They found orbital mines and laser nets and fighter squadrons that moved like insects, fast and hard to catch. The humans used decoy ships made of scrap metal to confuse targeting systems, and even launched cargo containers filled with explosives straight into the enemy lines. The first major human victory came near Jupiter, where a fleet of 9 human ships led by an experimental carrier waited in silence, hiding in the magnetic field of the gas giant. The alien ships moved in slowly, scanning for threats, unaware of what hid in the radiation. When the signal was given, the carrier launched dozens of stealth drones, each one carrying fusion warheads and guided by real-time feedback from Earth AI. When the warheads struck, 2 Varnock dreadnoughts were torn apart in less than 10 seconds. A third was disabled by a precision railgun shot through its command core. The aliens responded fast, unleashing return fire that scorched the black sky. But the humans were already gone, using slingshot maneuvers around Jupiter's moons to escape the counterattack. Their escape was not clean. One of the human ships was lost, caught in the fire of a plasma torpedo, but the rest made it back to the edge of the asteroid belt, carrying the message of victory. This victory was not just important for morale, it was also valuable for knowledge. One of the damaged alien ships was pulled from the debris field and brought back to a hidden research station near Titan. Their scientists and AI teams worked day and night to break its systems, to pull data, to learn everything they could about Alien design, communication, and technology. What they found shocked them. The Varnak had built systems designed only for known threats. They had no flexibility. No room for sudden change. Their weapons were strong but slow to adapt, and their command systems were centralized, which meant if the right node was hit, the entire fleet could fall into confusion. The Council took this knowledge and acted. Quickly they began designing missions around these weaknesses and gave new orders to all units. Avoid direct battle unless necessary. Hit their weak spots. Disappear before they respond. Strike where they do not expect, and never fight fair. Soon the aliens began to notice something had changed. Their patrols were attacked in deep space. Their convoys went missing without a trace, and even their communication beacons were hacked and filled with human music and mocking messages. Messages that said we are learning, messages that said we are not afraid, messages that said this is only the beginning. Even as the war spread, human civilians supported the fight. Every colony developed underground bunkers, every ship passing through human space was fitted with weapons, no matter how small. Even science vessels and cargo ships became tools of resistance. There were reports of a medical station near Europa that faked surrender only to release a swarm of nanobots into the enemy boarding party, disabling their suits and capturing them alive. Most daring mission of this period was led by a young captain aboard a vessel named Horizon Strike. The ship was old, repurposed from a mining hauler, but it had been upgraded with cloaking tech and new AI routines. The mission was simple: infiltrate an alien communication relay on the edge of the Helix sector, plant a virus, and escape unnoticed. The relay controlled data flow to 3 sectors of Varnak-controlled space. The Horizon Strike used dead debris to mask its signal and floated slowly toward the relay station, hiding among the wreckage of old ships and metal fragments. It took 10 hours to reach the edge of the sensor range, and another 2 to slip past the patrol drones. The virus was uploaded silently, and within minutes the alien communications began to fail across 3 entire regions of spaceships. Lost command orders, backup fleets moved to wrong coordinates, some ships even fired on each other, believing they were under human attack. When the Horizon Strike returned to base, the entire crew was promoted, and the AI that helped guide them was named a hero. The Union finally realized that this was not a war they could win easily. It was no longer a mission of control or punishment. It had become survival. The humans were not backing down, they were growing. They were adapting faster than any species had ever done before, and their technology was beginning to twist in ways the Union could not predict. More importantly, something ancient had awakened in them. Something raw and cold and terrifying, the will to win, not just to survive, but to prove that they would never be controlled, never be broken, never be forgotten. The humans had drawn a line in the stars and dared the galaxy to cross it. The sky above Earth no longer felt like safety. It felt like the edge of a storm that never passed, filled with echoes of distant explosions and signals. That meant danger. The world had changed so quickly that even the children who once looked up at the stars with dreams of exploration now saw them as battlefields and graves. The cities had lost their calm. Streets now echoed with the sound of marching boots, emergency drills, and air sirens. Every home had an underground shelter, every neighborhood trained together in basic survival. Even the schools taught battle history and alien identification more than poetry or art. But the most terrifying blow came not from a fleet or a weapon, but from something quiet, something invisible that drifted through the sky on silent waves. The Varnak had prepared this strike for months. A weapon not made of fire, but of silence, a massive electromagnetic wave released by a hidden ship near the Crue moon, aimed directly at Earth's grid system. Satellites fell from orbit, communication towers exploded, power stations failed, hospitals went dark, factories stopped, and across the planet, the lights went out, not for minutes or hours, but for entire days. In that darkness, people cried, not from fear of the aliens, but from fear of being alone, of not knowing if help would come or if the rest of humanity had already fallen. But humans are strange in that way, because even in the deepest silence, They find ways to shout back, and so they lit fires, they fixed broken radios. They built new signals from scrap parts. They passed messages by hand across cities, by bicycle across roads, by drone through forests and deserts. Some thought Earth would collapse in those days, that governments would fall and panic would eat through society. But the opposite happened. People came out of their homes, not to steal or riot, but to help. Neighbors cooked food together on rooftops, soldiers carried medicine on foot through miles of ruined streets, and doctors worked by candlelight, using tools from a century ago to save lives that were meant to be lost in minutes. Slowly systems began to return, not because of central command, but because of the millions of hands working together to restart civilization. Every wire reconnected, every circuit replaced. Every screen that lit up again was a victory, not just against the Varnuk, but against despair, and the alien coalition watched from afar, confused and disturbed, because they had seen many worlds fall, but never had they seen one rise back so fast with nothing but grit and belief. While Earth struggled to breathe again, the outer colonies did not rest. Mars turned its underground bunkers into research labs. Titan became a training ground for new fighter pilots. Neptune's moons launched long-range drones to locate hidden enemy ships in deep space. But the most dangerous move came from a fleet known only as the Silent Wing, a group of 30 human warships designed with stealth tech and eye coordination so advanced that even Earth Command lost contact with them sometimes. They had no names, no home ports, and no fixed mission. Their orders were simple: go where the enemy least expects and strike without mercy. The Silent Wing launched a mission so bold that it would be studied by military academies for centuries. They found an alien command base hidden in the shadow of a black hole, a place no sane ship would approach because of the gravity fields and sensor interference. But the humans used it to their advantage. They rode the gravitational pull like a current, launched themselves around the event horizon, and used the shadow to block all scans. Then they struck with every weapon. They had drones, torpedoes, ion beams, and more than half their own ships sacrificed in suicide runs just to ensure the command base was wiped from existence. The Union received no distress signal, no warning, no trace of survivors, only silence, and in that silence they felt something they had not felt in generations. They felt fear, because it was not just that the base had been destroyed, it was that no one saw it coming, and no one could explain how it happened across the galaxy. The rumors began to spread again. The humans are mad, the humans are fast, the humans are coming, and worst of all, the humans are learning too quickly for any plan to keep up. Inside the secret chambers of the Varnuk leadership, the generals screamed at each other. Some called for total planetary destruction, others wanted to retreat, regroup, rethink, but there was no agreement, only fear and frustration, and the old belief that perhaps the humans were not just another race, perhaps they were something else entirely. Something the galaxy had not seen since its first wars, something ancient and unstoppable. Back on Earth, the price of war was growing. Graves lined the fields once used for farming, oceans filled with ship wreckage, skies that used to host music and fireworks now glowed with the trails of missiles and plasma fire. But the people kept moving forward. They wrote new songs about the fallen. They painted murals on bunker walls showing brave pilots and lost medics. They did not forget, and they did not forgive. In the ruins of an old city where the blackout had lasted longest, a new type of communication hub was built, powered by solar towers and protected by mobile armor. The hub became the nerve center for resistance messages coded in layers of old languages. Human and alien alike were sent across the stars, warning friendly colonies, sharing new tech, exposing enemy weaknesses, and every time the messages reached their targets, the hope grew stronger. The humans had become more than just defenders, they had become hunters, and the galaxy was watching. Some feared them, some admired them, but all knew that the tide was turning. No longer was this war about stopping human expansion. Now it was about surviving human retaliation. The spark had become a fire. The fire was now a storm, and the storm was just beginning to roar. Stars that once brought dreams to children now burned with the heat of weapons and the trails of destruction. Earth stood still as it waited beneath the storm. The sky was not blue that day, but filled with shadows of the largest fleet ever seen in human history and in the history of the alien union. The Varnock had called for final judgment, a fleet built not to conquer, but to erase. They brought warships, larger than mountains, engines that glowed like stars, and weapons that could split moons. They came not just to destroy Earth, but to end the idea of humanity itself. People looked up and saw the sky covered with metal. The oceans reflected the slow movement of enemy dreadnoughts. Clouds were torn apart by the pressure of incoming ships. The air trembled with sound that made no sense to the ears, but was understood by the heart. It meant the end was near. But Earth was not silent, and it was not alone. Thousands of defense platforms surrounded the planet, built in secret during the months of darkness. Space mines floated behind the shadows of moons, ready to strike. Hidden artillery deep inside mountain ranges, powered by the planet's own core, activated with silent codes and waiting for targets to pass above. And then there were the ships. Human ships, not as many as the enemy and not as large, but they moved with purpose and fury. Some built from scrap, some fresh from Mars, some old enough to remember Earth's first steps beyond the moon. Yet all of them pointed upward, ready to fight until the last moment. Inside the orbiting war room, the council had given no final speech. There were no long words, no promises, only a nod passed from one to the next, a signal that everyone understood. This was not the end. This was the proof that they never gave up, and even if they lost, they would make sure the galaxy never forgot what it meant to push a free people against the wall. Battle began with silence, a quiet so heavy that it seemed to press against the bones of every living being. And then came the first flash, a burst of light that lit the dark side of the planet, followed by another, then another, until the sky turned into a furnace of fire and metal. Ships collided in waves, weapons fired across the black void, and missiles screamed through the atmosphere as shields broke apart and hulls tore open. Humans did not retreat, they moved straight into the heart of the storm. Varnock formation was tight and proud. They advanced in perfect shape with calculated paths and coordinated waves. But the humans broke the pattern. They scattered, they separated, they attacked from strange angles, using gravity wells and asteroid fields and their own falling satellites as cover. One ship called Iron Wraith rammed directly into the center of a Varnock command carrier, disabling both vessels in one suicidal move. The name of its crew was never spoken again, only remembered in code engraved into every fighter wing. After Earth's skies lit up with defensive firestorms launched from the polar bunkers and guided by ice systems buried under Antarctica and the Himalayas, the alien ships began to slow as wave after wave of energy crashed against their shields, weakening their structure and forcing their captains to break formation, to respond to threats they had never seen before. And while they hesitated, the humans moved in swarms of small fighters, buzzed like angry insects around the giants, stinging, cutting, burning, dragging larger ships into traps designed to collapse magnetic drives or fry targeting systems. But even with every effort, every plan, every drop of strength, the alien fleet was overwhelming. They began descending into Earth's lower orbit, breaking through the last outer lines. The command council saw it happen on their screens and knew the final move had to come. Now, not tomorrow, not in minutes, but in the breath that followed. And so they activated Project Revenant, a weapon never meant to be used but built in secret, far beyond the orbit of Pluto. Powered by stolen alien tech and human desperation, Project Revenant was not a beam or a bomb. It was a tear, a hole in space, generated by collapsing energy fields around a singularity. It could swallow light itself, and anything caught in its pull would be lost forever. The command was given, and the signal sent. The station holding the device opened its arms and fired, not at Earth, not at the planet's surface, but upward into the heart of the invading fleet, where the enemy formation was thickest and most proud. The sky bent for a moment, stars flickered and stretched, and then part of the alien fleet began to collapse inward, pulled by a force They could not see or understand massive ships screamed as metal tore and vanished. Engines failed, lights died, and pieces of what was once the greatest army in the galaxy spun into nothingness. Humans stopped firing and watched as the enemy struggled to escape. Some succeeded pulling away just in time, but many did not, and the fear that had once been only a shadow in the minds of the aliens now became real. They had never seen a weapon like this. They had never imagined humans would go so far. They had never thought that Earth could fight like a god of war. One final message was broadcast from Earth across every channel, every frequency, using every language known and unknown. It said only one sentence, and that sentence traveled farther than any missile could ever reach. We are still here. The remaining alien ships pulled away slowly like beasts that had been wounded and now feared another strike. They left behind wreckage, smoke, silence, and fear. They left behind something they could not destroy. They left behind humanity. Battle was over, not because Earth was safe, but because Earth had become something no longer possible to conquer, and those who had come to erase it now fled with the memory of its fire, burned into their mind forever. The sky was quiet again, but it was not the same silence that once carried peace. It was the silence that follows something impossible, the kind of silence that carries the weight of memory and the truth that everything has changed. The war had not ended with a treaty or a handshake or surrender. It ended with absence. The great alien fleet had vanished not only from Earth's orbit, but from every human system. It had retreated, limping, bleeding, and shaken, leaving behind pieces of itself scattered across the void. Humanity stood in the wreckage of its own survival. Smoke still rose from broken cities. The sea still carried the burned remains of fallen satellites, and even the air tasted of iron and ash. But the people walked through it all without falling. Their eyes were tired, but their hands kept working, clearing ruins, rebuilding walls, lifting others from rubble, carrying water where machines no longer worked, and lighting new fires in places where homes had turned to dust. Council that had guided the war did not claim victory. They spoke no grand words and held no parades. Instead, they walked with the people, helping carry the weight of what had been lost. Names were written not on stone, but in memory. Every colony, every station, every crew member, every child who did not make it through the long nights was remembered in stories, and those stories were passed to anyone who would. Listening. Orbit above Earth. A new station was being built, not as a weapon, not as a wall, but as a place of record where the events of the war would be kept. Not just in numbers or data, but in feeling and voice, in music and paintings, made by those who had seen the fire and survived it. Scholars came not only from Earth, but from distant colonies to record every whisper, every signal, every name, and the name of the war itself was agreed in silence, the war of reckoning. But it was not just humans who remembered, because far beyond Earth and systems that had once been proud and untouched, alien leaders now spoke in hushed tones about the day humanity rose. The Varnak, who had once led the invasion, now kept their fleets near their own worlds. Their people asked questions. Their soldiers refused orders, and their scientists rewrote the models of threat assessment, because the humans had changed everything. Not just by winning, but by surviving and adapting so quickly that it broke the logic of war on distant worlds. Young alien children listened to bedtime stories, not about monsters in the dark, but about the planet called Earth and the species that refused to die. Teachers warned their students never to underestimate a human, never to confuse kindness with weakness, never to assume the stars belonged only to the old and powerful, because one day, they said, you may face the ones who live. The fire started, and you will understand what fear truly is. The Galactic Union did not dissolve, but it fractured. Many species who had once trusted the old powers began to question their place in the order. Some reached out to Earth, not with threats, but with curiosity. They sent small ships, peaceful envoys asking not for surrender, but for understanding, and humanity did not respond with pride or revenge. They opened their doors slowly and carefully, offering knowledge in return for respect, not For dominance, not for conquest, only for space to grow and peace to be real back on Earth. A young girl stood on the broken edge of what was once a spaceport. Her family had lived in the underground shelters through the worst of it, and now she walked. With her grandfather, who had been a pilot in the first battles, he pointed to the sky and told her that once it had been full of fire and death, but now it was full of stories and dreams. She asked if the aliens would come again, and he answered that maybe they would, but next time they would not come with fire, they would come with questions, because fear had changed to caution and caution might change to respect. The girl picked up a piece of broken ship metal from the ground shaped like a shard of a blade. She carried it home and placed it on a shelf where other children might keep flowers or toys, not as a weapon, but as a reminder that even the smallest hands could carry the memory of something great years past in the world. Healed new cities rose with solar walls and gardens on rooftops. Space travel became common again, not for war, but for exploration, and everywhere humans went, they were greeted with awe and sometimes fear, but always with recognition, because the story of the war had traveled faster than any ship. It lived in code, in ruins, in stars, and in silence on a quiet planet near the edge of the known systems. An alien scholar stepped out from a diplomatic ship and placed his feet on Earth for the first time. He came not to study weapons, but to study people. He visited the cities, the schools, the graves, and the homes, and everywhere he saw signs of a species that should not have survived, but did not only survive, but became stronger than before. He wrote in his journal that humans did not grow because of war, they grew in spite of it, and that was the secret the galaxy had not understood. Before he left, he stood at the edge of the mountain where the last enemy ship had fallen and looked into the distance where children played among the flowers and wind carried laughter into the open sky. He closed his journal and whispered a final note, not for his leaders but for the stars: do not threaten what you do not understand. So the war ended not with fire, but with memory. The humans returned to their lives, stronger, wiser, and ready not to rule the stars, but to live among them, not to destroy the old, but to build the new. And the galaxy watched quietly, always remembering the time they thought Earth would fall and learned that Earth rises. The end.